My name is Anna Whitmore. At 19, when the spring examination results were announced, I found myself captivated by a young scholar named Edward Blackwood, who had achieved third place in the imperial examinations. I never imagined that when my father sought a husband for me after the imperial examinations and arranged my marriage to Edward, the newly appointed scholar, his heart already belonged to another. Later, when father was falsely accused and imprisoned, sentenced to exile in the southern borderlands, Edward welcomed back his childhood sweetheart Ruby, whom he had just helped obtain a divorce. He announced his intention to take her as his second wife. Me mother-in-law scolded me harshly. "You have been married for 3 years without bearing a child? Do you dare forbid my son from taking another wife?" Wood sneered at me coldly. "You no longer have any support. Stop making unreasonable demands." What he didn't know was that I still possessed the divorce papers he had written for me in a fit of rage years ago. In 7 days, I would embark on the journey to the southern borderlands with my father. On the very day father was imprisoned, Edward brought Ruby back to the estate. She was the childhood love he had just helped secure a divorce from her unhappy marriage. He entered my courtyard with that indifferent tone I had grown to know so well. "In 7 days, I will take Ruby as my second wife. I have wronged her for far too long. No matter how unwilling you may feel, you must endure it." Father had only just been imprisoned, yet Edward couldn't wait even a single day. I lifted my gaze to meet his. His eyes were as cold as winter ice that refuses to thaw, devoid of even the slightest trace of affection. Throughout our 3 years of marriage, I had never been able to touch his heart. I turned my head away in distress, trying to hide the pain in my chest. "Very well," I whispered. After all, I would soon be leaving this place. Whom he chose to bring into his household was no longer my concern. A flicker of surprise crossed Edward's features. His lips parted as if to speak, but ultimately no words emerged. He had always been sparing with his words when it came to me. After he departed, I opened my jewelry box and retrieved a piece of paper hidden beneath all my ornaments. It was the divorce decree Edward had written for me 3 years ago in his drunken state. It bore his signature and seal. I need only present this document to the authorities to secure our permanent separation. 3 years ago at the palace banquet celebrating the successful candidates, I had fallen in love at first sight with Edward, the young scholar who had placed third in the imperial examinations. Within 3 days, he had sent matchmakers to request my hand in marriage. I believed it was a match blessed by heaven itself. Only when news of Ruby's wedding reached the capital did I understand the truth. That night, Edward drank himself into a stupor. I prepared a sobering soup and personally carried it to his study. He lay sprawled across his desk, eyes bloodshot, calling my name, Anna. Thinking he needed me, I hurried forward. Without warning, he seized a ceramic paperweight from his desk and hurled it violently to the floor. The weight shattered near my skirts, fragments scattering everywhere. My heart nearly stopped from fright. Edward, usually gentle as jade, ground his teeth as he spoke. "Anna, this is all your fault. If you hadn't set your sights on me, if your father weren't the Minister of Personnel, how could I have been forced to marry you? How could I have watched helplessly as Ruby married another?" His voice carried such overwhelming hatred. What I had believed to be marital harmony was merely my own wishful thinking. The pain lodged in my chest, making it difficult to breathe, and tears began to fall despite my efforts. Edward staggered to his feet, took up his writing brush, and hastily scrawled out divorce papers. He signed his name, pressed his seal, then carelessly tossed the flimsy document before me. "I want to divorce you and bring Ruby home," he declared. In his severe intoxication, he had spoken such words aloud. I struggled to control my emotions, choking back tears. "You are drunk. We can discuss this when you are sober." I bent to retrieve the paper, then turned and left, gently closing the door behind me. Tears flowed down my cheeks like water bursting through a dam. I returned to my courtyard alone. The night wind was cold, yet it could not cool the ache in my heart. The next day, when Edward sobered, He resumed his usual courteous demeanor. He no longer mentioned Ruby, nor spoke of divorce. I buried that paper at the bottom of my jewelry box, deceiving myself with the thought that Ruby had married poorly, and Edward and I still had years ahead of us. Ruby had indeed married unwisely. 2 months ago, Edward personally wrote to the magistrate of Songyang County to help secure her divorce. Taking pity on her solitary state, he brought her to the capital and provided for her. Now he planned to make her his second wife. When Edward brought Ruby to meet me, I was cataloging my dowry. When I had married Edward, I had brought 80 chests of wedding gifts. Now I needed to inventory everything carefully and convert it to banknotes for bribing the prison guards. Edward entered, and I set aside my ledgers, rising to greet them. Ruby wishes to live in this courtyard, he stated coldly. You will vacate it. His voice was distant and final, brooking no discussion. This courtyard lay closest to Edward's quarters. Its gardens bloomed with flowers, including crabapple trees he had planted himself. Beneath the wisteria arbor stood a swing he had built for me as newlyweds. Ruby lingered behind him, timidly peering out with envious almond-shaped eyes. I met his gaze and refused him for the first time. That is not possible. This estate is vast. Surely there are other suitable accommodations. Why must it be this particular courtyard? She tugged at Edward's sleeve, displaying her displeasure. Edward's expression darkened. Because Ruby favors this place. Because these crabapple blossoms were always meant for her. So this courtyard had been intended for Ruby from the very beginning. Ruby curved her lips in a gentle smile, lovely as the drooping crabapple flowers that adorned the estate's walls. I stared at her until Edward stepped protectively in front of her, his voice turning arctic. You will move out today. Be reasonable and spare us all embarrassment. I lowered my eyes and quietly acquiesced. Very well. With father imprisoned, I had lost my greatest support. Edward no longer needed to maintain even the pretense of mutual respect. By sunset, I had relocated to a remote corner courtyard, then gathered the jewelry Edward had given me over the years to sell at the Treasure Pavilion. I had once spent lavishly at this establishment, and the proprietress greeted me warmly, leading me to a private room where I laid out each piece on the table. The first item, a pair of gold hairpins Edward had given me when he came to propose. Fresh from passing the examinations with little family wealth, he had used all his savings to have these delicate pins crafted for me. The second, a jade bracelet he had purchased with his salary after his promotion to assistant minister. The third, a jeweled hair ornament he had given me as an apology after that night of drunken cruelty. I had loved wearing this piece when running to greet him, its dangling pearls chiming softly. He would laugh and embrace me, saying I was carefree and different from other proper ladies. The proprietress's eyes widened. These appear to be pieces Master Edward purchased here several years ago. Are you certain you wish to sell them, madam? Quite certain, I replied. She examined each piece carefully before sliding a banknote across the table. Lacking skill in negotiation, I accepted the payment and prepared to leave. Outside, the streets bustled with activity. I heard Edward's voice, warm with affection. Do you like this hairpin? Ruby's shy response, I do. Without hesitation, Edward purchased it for her. As he counted out payment, his gaze fell upon me. I saw recognition and confusion flicker across his features as he noticed my bare wrist where the jade bracelet had always rested. Edward abandoned his transaction, grasping my wrist firmly and staring directly into my eyes. Anna, where is your bracelet? I averted my gaze, lying smoothly. I simply didn't wear it today. His grip tightened painfully, his expression growing thunderous. Ruby anxiously tugged at his sleeve. Only then did he seem to remember himself, releasing me and turning to smile at her. Forgive my rudeness just now. Under the varied stares of onlookers, I departed alone. The following day, my mother-in-law summoned me to help prepare for Edward and Ruby's wedding ceremony. I had other pressing matters and politely declined. Her previously pleasant demeanor vanished as she berated me. You have been married 3 years without producing an heir. How dare you object to my son taking another wife? I bowed my head respectfully. I certainly have no objections. I am simply occupied with urgent affairs at present. Edward's decision to take a second wife had never required my permission. Why should I be expected to arrange their celebration? I offered only mild resistance to her demands, then excused myself. On my way back to my quarters, I encountered Edward again. He wore moon-white robes, his handsome features relaxed, as he shared tea with Ruby in the rear garden. She wore a red agate and pearl hair ornament, smiling as she poured his tea. When she leaned forward, the ornament remained perfectly still. Steam rose from the hot tea as their gazes met through the fragrant mist, intimate and tender. Though young in his official career, Edward often claimed excessive duties kept him in his study all day. Such leisurely moments he had never shared with me. I hesitated briefly but didn't linger, hurrying back to my courtyard like one fleeing. Me thoughts were in turmoil, making it impossible to concentrate on my account books. The infatuation that had begun with a glimpse at a banquet had trapped me for 3 years. Only now could I see clearly. Edward's feelings for me were false, while his love for Ruby was genuine. I sat staring blankly at my ledgers, until my maid Joshua brought the inventory of my dowry. Madam, the accounting is complete. Apart from items sold earlier to cover expenses, several pieces remain unaccounted for. I looked up sharply. Which pieces? My parents had provided such an extensive dowry that I couldn't remember every item. A pair of red agate and pearl hair ornaments, and an emerald phoenix crown, she replied. The red agate and pearl ornament, I had seen Ruby wearing it. I burst into Ruby's courtyard to find her admiring herself in a bronze mirror trying on the phoenix crown. Their wedding was scheduled in 6 days, hastily arranged. I had assumed Edward had prepared everything in advance, so eager was he to marry her. I hadn't expected her to help herself to my mother's phoenix crown from the family treasury. Rage coursed through me as I reached for the crown, yanking out the elaborate hairpins and casting them to the floor. Some caught in her long hair, which I pulled free without gentleness. She gasped in pain, her coiffure disheveled, forced to tilt her head back pleadingly. Please, release me and I'll remove them myself. I clutched my phoenix crown, regarding her coldly. Ruby tumbled from her chair to the floor, hair in disarray, several strands torn loose and scattered about. She looked utterly wretched, gazing up at me through tears. Madam, you need only have asked, and I would have removed them. Why resort to this? I nudged her with my toe. My possessions, taken without permission, and you ask why. She buried her face in her hands, weeping like rain on pear blossoms. Suddenly footsteps approached. Edward strode in, pushing me aside to gather Ruby in his arms. I staggered backward, instinctively grasping the dressing table to steady myself. The phoenix crown slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor with a sickening crack as one of the red gems split. He stared at me with loathing and unfamiliarity, as though he had never known me. Anna, why must you torment her? My grievances lodged in my throat, emerging only as a broken whisper. She took something my mother left me. His voice turned glacial. It is merely a crown. What harm is there in letting her wear it briefly? Would you rather destroy it than lend it to Ruby? You have lost your backing now. Stop this behavior. I stood frozen as his words cut through me. Though spring had arrived, I felt chilled to the bone. Edward knew precisely how to wound me. The crown's gem had cracked, and Ruby, nestled in Edward's arms, frowned with displeasure. She no longer wanted it. He murmured soothingly, I'll have another made for you in time for the wedding. I bent to retrieve my damaged crown and walked away alone. My heart clenched so tightly I could barely breathe. Just a few more days. Once everything was arranged, I would leave. I converted most of my dowry to banknotes and secured them carefully. Edward avoided me for a day before finally seeking me out. He informed me that father had been demoted to assistant prefect and would depart for Lingnan in 3 days. Mother would accompany him, while I, as a married daughter, could remain in the capital and continue as an official's wife. Edward leaned against the doorframe, backlit so his refined features were shrouded in shadow. Anna, had you not married me, you would now face exile to that land of pestilence and savage rains. I remained non-committal. Had I not been infatuated with Edward at first sight, I could have married well even among the imperial princes. Why endure such treatment? Seeing my silence, he produced a bracelet from his sleeve and placed it heavily on my dressing table. You deceived me. You sold it. He emphasized the word deceived with particular bitterness. I replied quietly. I no longer wanted it, so I sold it. Is that difficult to understand? Anger flashed in his eyes. The steward says you've also been selling portions of your dowry recently. You no longer wear jewelry or socialize. What need have you for such funds? His piercing gaze seemed intent on boring a hole through me. I met his stare calmly. My father faces demotion to distant Lingnan. The journey is long and expensive, requiring bribes at every turn. This was truth, and Edward had no reason to doubt it. He began placing the items I had sold days earlier onto my dressing table one by one, jade and pearls chiming against each other. His eyes were cold as winter. You sold everything I gave you, Anna. Are you trying to spite me? I bowed my head silently, carefully arranging the dangling pearls of the hair ornament before placing it in my jewelry box. I would take it to Lingnan to sell. His reach couldn't extend that far. The lock clicked shut. No, I said softly. I wasn't spiting him. I simply no longer needed anything he offered. Edward's voice was frigid and mocking. Ruby should have been my first wife. You have no right to compete with her for my affections. I responded woodenly. I understand. Ruby should have been his first wife. He and Ruby were the true pair of lovers. I had heard such words many times, no need for further emphasis. He fell silent. I continued my tasks, removing the elaborate pins from my hair and braiding it simply myself. In Lingnan, there would be no maids to dress my hair. Perhaps seeing my compliance that day, Edward's tone softened. Let the servants handle such tasks. I curved my lips in a perfunctory smile. Of course. The lanterns were connected by red silk ribbons bearing Edward's calligraphy. May mandarin ducks entwine their necks for 1,000 years. May zither and harp harmonize for a century. May we be paired swallows in flight, never parting for 100 years. Our wedding 3 years ago had featured no such decorations. I gazed out my window as Ruby appeared at the corridor's end. She seemed particularly joyful today. Her eyes curved in smiles as she walked gracefully toward me, her red skirts flowing like a golden carp in motion. She paused before my door, calling softly, "Sister Anna, what hairstyle do you think I should wear for the wedding?" She wore her newly tailored wedding robes, but her hair hung loose, like an unmarried maiden's. I replied. This isn't your first marriage. Must you ask me about such trivial matters? Her expression stiffened, color draining from her face. Her lips moved but seemed unable to form words. Edward appeared from around the corridor, his gaze stern as he defended her. Anna, you are also a woman. Why must you wound her with references to the past? Ruby wished to improve relations with you, which is why she came to ask your opinion. How was she not equally attempting to wound me? Edward simply couldn't see it, his eyes held only her. I stood in my doorway, looking down at her. Style your hair as you did for your previous wedding. There, I've answered you. You may go now. Tears welled in her eyes as she stumbled backward into Edward's embrace, fragile and helpless. Edward frowned, threatening me. Anna, you have already committed the 7 grounds for divorce. I could easily write you divorce papers and be done with you. I stared at his face, bitterness flooding my heart. My lips curved in a smile even as tears gathered in my eyes. That won't be necessary. Woodward, I already possess your divorce papers. He laughed mockingly. Unnecessary. If not for the approaching celebration, I would write them immediately. He had grown accustomed to speaking cruelly to me. Any words came easily to his lips. I leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing as I watched him lead Ruby away. She nestled against his chest, smiling up at him. The corridor lanterns cast a red glow across their profiles, a picture of mutual devotion. I drew a deep breath to calm myself, then instructed my maid, "Prepare a carriage for tomorrow. I must visit the Ministry of Rights." I returned to my room and retrieved the divorce papers from my jewelry box. Taking up my brush, I signed my name and pressed my seal with decisive strokes. The divorce proceedings concluded smoothly, with both spouses' signatures and seals, and the Pei family's declining influence making Edward's desire to distance himself seem reasonable. The ministry officials asked no questions. I also transferred my household registration back to the Pei family. By the time I finished these arrangements and returned home, noon had passed. Tomorrow would bring the wedding feast, and the entire household bustled with preparations, no one paying me any attention. I returned to pack the belongings I would take with me. I had 2 rosewood chests of items sent ahead, while the banknotes, being thin, could be carried on my person. I had already written to my parents we could depart at dawn. My room had been cleaned thoroughly, showing no trace of my 3 years' residence. As night fell, Edward's maid brought me an elaborate gown. She bowed low. "The master asked me to deliver this, madam. He personally selected the fabric 2 months ago. You may wear it tomorrow to observe the ceremony." The material was finest silk that shimmered in the ruddy candlelight. My maid accepted it, but the servant girl remained standing below the steps. "The master asked me to convey that his words yesterday were spoken in anger. He hopes you won't take them to heart. Words once spoken are like spilled water, impossible to reclaim." The wounds remained fresh. I paused, then simply nodded to show I had heard. She looked up cautiously, asking quietly, "Do you have any message for the master, madam?" The night wind was cold, making my eyes dry and uncomfortable. I said slowly, "Nothing. Return quickly and report back." She departed promptly. That night, I slept poorly. Servants passed constantly before my door, lanterns burning throughout the night. Edward's wedding brought generous rewards for the staff, and everyone worked joyfully despite their exhaustion. I rose before dawn. The sky had barely lightened when I donned plain clothing and a veil, preparing to leave. The steward still recognized me and asked casually, "Where is Madame Anna going? The wedding feast begins in an hour." Ruby would also be styled Madam now to distinguish us. He used my family name. I smiled to see my parents off at the city gate. No need to inform the master. He bowed. "Yes, madam." I boarded my carriage toward the city gate. The wheels rolled forward as wedding guests traveled in the opposite direction toward the estate. I lowered the curtain, staring fixedly at my feet. 3 years ago, Edward and I had wed, enjoying a period of mutual respect. In my naivety, I believed that with Ruby married and myself as his wife, this was simply how our lives would unfold. I thought kindness could eventually win his heart, until a year ago when he received another letter from Ruby. After our marriage, Edward had risen rapidly through official ranks, gaining promotion almost annually. I loved him, and my father supported his career. His life was prosperous, his future bright, even more promising than his examination success. But Ruby's married life had been miserable. Her husband favored his concubine while neglecting his wife, making her days unbearable. At 19, she was already exhausted and growing thin. Unable to contain her suffering, she poured out her troubles to her childhood friend. That letter's ink had been nearly dissolved by her tears. She should have married Edward. They should have been young sweethearts. Edward felt guilty toward her and resentful toward me. From then on, he secretly provided for her while growing distant from me. I realized now that I had awakened far too late. An hour later, I boarded the carriage bound for Lingnan. My parents knew I had divorced Edward. They merely sighed, regretting their failure to judge his character and my resulting suffering. I pressed my lips together, not daring to speak. My confusion had led to mistake after mistake. The journey to Lingnan was long, but my funds allowed comfortable travel by water in larger boats and overland with swift horses from the post stations. We reached the Lingnan official residence after more than 2 weeks. I had expected difficulty adjusting, but after falling ill briefly due to the change in climate, I adapted well. Mother planted fruits and vegetables in our courtyard. The hot, humid climate made everything grow rapidly. Father's salary had decreased significantly. I carefully saved the money I had brought for emergencies while learning to weave cloth and sew garments alongside Mother. Here we lacked soft silks and gleaming jewelry, but I lived comfortably and happily. I could taste fruits unknown in the capital and witness scenery never seen before. Daily eating lychees, I'd gladly remain forever in Lingnan. Gradually, I forgot my former life, forgot the feelings I had shared with Edward. The days of mutual respect and rare tenderness, the long nights of loneliness under his cold neglect, all flowed past like running water. Events passed like dreams, leaving no trace. Returning from a colleague's son's wedding banquet, Mother took my hand and asked with concern, "I noticed you seemed distracted earlier. Were you thinking of that person again?" I was startled, then answered honestly, "I was wondering how they prepared the white-cut chicken differently from yours." She laughed. "I'll have your father inquire tomorrow." I hugged Mother's arm, acting coquettish with animated conversation. Before the wedding ceremony began, Edward had lingered outside my door. He wanted to explain that divorce was merely careless words spoken without intention. He only meant to tell me that now I had only him to depend upon. Somehow, he had grown accustomed to speaking harshly to me. Edward actually felt some regret for his cruel words, regret for always causing me pain. Hearing no sound from within, he asked the steward, "Where is my wife?" The steward, assuming he meant Ruby, replied, "Madam is having her hair arranged." "Good," Edward said. Yesterday Edward had sent me new robes, fabric he had selected 2 months earlier and commissioned. Seeing beautiful things, he instinctively thought of giving them to me. The lake blue color would suit me well. He imagined how the garments would look on me and unconsciously smiled. But he didn't see me throughout the entire wedding ceremony. His eyelid twitched as he again asked the steward, "Where is my wife?" The steward bowed fearfully. "Do you mean Madame Anna? She left early this morning to see off Master Perry at the city gate." The auspicious hour had arrived. Edward, ignoring Ruby behind him, rushed to the side courtyard and burst through my door. The room was cleaned bare, as if I had never lived there. Only the lake blue robes remained untouched in the room. Edward's heart plummeted, followed by sharp pain striking his chest. He was about to lose me. Edward ran to the stables, seized a swift horse, and galloped out the gate under his guests' astonished stares. Ruby called after him, lifting her wedding skirts as she stumbled forward, tears streaming. "Edward, don't abandon me again." The wind roared in his ears. He didn't hear her. She tripped over the threshold and was helped back inside by servants. Edward rode in his wedding robes, whipping his horse mercilessly in desperate pursuit. The wind brought tears to his bloodshot eyes. He watched helplessly as a simple carriage passed through the city gate. He tried to follow but was stopped. Edward, as a court official, could not leave the capital without imperial decree. He watched the carriage disappear from sight, growing smaller and smaller. Edward collapsed from his horse, strength draining from his body. Lingnan lay thousands of miles from the capital. We might never meet again in this lifetime. He covered his face with both hands, tears flowing through his fingers as he sobbed in anguish. Everyone was shocked. The gate captain hastily helped him up. Ruby had been merely an obsession from youth he couldn't obtain. He had always believed he was forced by political pressure to marry me, that he should resent me, should distance himself, should compensate Ruby. Through daily companionship, he couldn't claim his heart had never been moved. Only now did Edward see clearly. Losing me was the true heartbreak. I had expected to remain in Lingnan for many years. But 2 years later, Father was recalled through my uncle's efforts. Uncle wrote urging caution. Father's name had been cleared not only through past achievements, but also his reputation for diligent governance and love for the people in Lingnan, prompting the emperor's recall. He must be extremely careful in words and actions going forward. Father's recall involved not only Uncle but also Edward. When Edward was mentioned, Father's expression remained impassive. To Edward, Father was not merely a former father-in-law, but also a mentor. His concern for Father's affairs seemed quite natural. In early spring, I returned to the capital with my parents. Unable to reclaim our former official residence, Father moved us into the old family estate in the suburbs. When Edward came seeking me, the suburbs were experiencing their first spring rain. He stood before our gate holding an oil paper umbrella. The fine, dense raindrops hung between us, like a veil of mist. I recalled our first meeting. He had stood among the crowd, tall and distinguished, as if shrouded in mist, precious as pearl and jade. Now he had aged and grown thin, his temperament settled like an ancient well without ripples. Seeing him no longer made my heart race as before. I stood under the eaves, tucking my hands into my sleeves, asking with lowered eyes, "What brings Master Edward here?" His voice was hoarse. "Anna, I never truly wanted to divorce you. Those were words spoken in anger because you sold the gifts I gave you." I looked into his eyes, saying softly, "Edward, you've spoken such angry words twice before. The first time, I deceived myself and hid the divorce papers. The second time, I finally resolved to leave Edward." Surprise and confusion flickered across his features. He seemed not to remember. After all, he had been drunk, and 5 years had passed. I calmly reminded him, "5 years ago when you were drunk, you said it was all my fault for making you watch Ruby marry another. The divorce papers were written then too. 2 years ago, I used those papers to secure our divorce. We no longer have any connection. If you wish to discuss matters with my father, I can relay a message." His face turned deathly pale. His lips moved, barely managing a few words. "I came seeking you, Anna. Then there is nothing to discuss." I stepped back and closed the door, shutting out everything beyond. The servants reported that Edward didn't leave. He stood outside all night until Ruby came looking for him. When Edward had made such a spectacle of bringing her back, many people knew her story. Her entanglement with a married man and her past were no secrets. Most people disliked her, speaking sarcastically and blaming her for forcing me away. At such social gatherings, she could only sit in corners, enduring complete ostracism. Ignored her, focusing on cutting colored paper shapes. Lady Yi whispered in my ear, "From wife of a minor county clerk to wife of a ministry counselor, what more could she want?" I considered this. Perhaps that is not what she truly desired. I handed Lady Yi small silver scissors. She sat with me, cutting colored paper to attach to flower branches, as offerings to the flower goddess, praying for abundant blooms. Lady Yi grew restless, soon abandoning her cutting to chase butterflies. Ruby approached me, her voice soft but heavy with resentment. "Anna, this is all your fault." I was somewhat bewildered. Mine again. Though still young with a healthy spine, I couldn't bear so much blame. If you hadn't insisted on marrying Edward, I could have wed him 5 years ago. I wouldn't have suffered so, and his heart wouldn't hold another. We wouldn't have reached this point of mutual disgust. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache. "Why don't you blame him instead?" She was taken aback. I continued. "Even if he hadn't married me, he would have married someone else. At 22, he was already a fifth-rank ministry counselor, a position many spend lifetimes pursuing unsuccessfully. The top scholar from his examination year still ranks below him. If he had wanted to marry you, no one could have stopped him. He simply couldn't abandon his ambitions. You should be grateful he married me rather than someone else. I was easily manipulated. Another woman would have dealt with both of you when you first wrote to Edward. Actually, when Edward helped secure her divorce, I had been happy for her escape from misery. Later, I came to dislike her like my former self. She couldn't see clearly. After speaking slowly, I set down my scissors to leave. She stood red-eyed among the flowers, tears flowing unstoppably. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. When I returned home at sunset, Mother told me several families had sent matchmakers seeking marriage connections. "I don't wish to remarry," I said. Having experienced it once, I saw little benefit in marriage, only additional responsibilities. Managing household affairs, supporting a husband, worrying about heirs. If you chose poorly, endless suffering followed. Living alone was far more peaceful and free. Mother respected my decision and politely declined all proposals. I helped Mother manage household affairs, and occasionally traveled with friends. The days passed happily. Edward frequently sent me gifts, sometimes curious trinkets. sometimes lengthy letters of explanation. I returned everything unopened. On an ordinary night, Ruby came to see me. She had grown thin and haggard. Despite the cold wind outside, I invited her in. She wept as she apologized. I was terribly wrong before. I failed you completely. I watched her calmly, offering a handkerchief for her tears. She explained that Edward merely provided for her while rarely visiting. No one in the household spoke to her, making each day oppressive. Edward had failed to marry her as promised years ago, and now Edward neglected her. She sobbed, "I hate him." I listened with my chin in my hand, unsure how to judge their entangled love and hatred. As long as they didn't blame me anymore. Ruby seemed to have lacked anyone to confide in for so long. She spoke at length while I grew drowsy listening. Finally, she asked, "Can you forgive me? I was wrong to compete with you and take your possessions, causing you pain. I know I was mistaken." I considered this. "Very well. Once you repair my phoenix crown, I'll forgive you." 6 months later, Ruby returned my restored phoenix crown. The originally cracked red gem had been replaced with one of superior quality. She had personally attached each tiny pearl grain. All scratches had vanished. Quite good. At least during those 6 months of crown repair, she hadn't been bored or constantly dwelling on Edward's love. Two significant events occurred during this period. First, father's name was cleared and his position restored. Second, Edward was implicated in political struggles and exiled to Lingnan. This didn't surprise me. His meteoric rise had been too smooth. He inevitably retained some naivety and lacked sufficient caution, making missteps likely. Before departing, he came to see me again, as before. I stood on the high steps of the minister's residence, looking down at him. He stood below, posture constrained. He had to look up to meet my eyes. "I am going to Lingnan, perhaps for many years. Does this constitute atonement?" His voice was hoarse. I didn't care to hear such words. "Number your own carelessness brought you to this state. It has nothing to do with me." I turned and left. Ruby would accompany Edward to Lingnan. Having no friends in the capital, only I came to see her off. She sat in the simple carriage, lifting the curtain to look at me with dimmed eyes. I knew her worries. Lingnan was always described as a land of pestilent rains and savage conditions. The journey is simply long, but you can spend more of Edward's money for a larger, more comfortable carriage. Lingnan has abundant fruits, many delicious varieties unknown in the capital. Her lips curved in a smile, gentle and radiant, like when I first met her. A tear fell from the corner of her eye. "Thank you, Anna." In the capital, I studied extensively. I read classical texts while learning acupuncture and woodblock printing. Father didn't remain in the minister's position indefinitely. He later requested external appointment, taking me to Linan Prefecture and Jiangling Prefecture. Having seen the empire's prosperity, I was no longer troubled by trivial matters. Edward achieved some success in Lingnan, but lacked advocates at court. He was later transferred to various posts, yet never managed to return to the capital. Our last meeting had been that final encounter before his departure from the capital. Years later, I received a letter from Ruby. After 10 years of marriage to Edward, she had finally resolved to divorce. Unlike me, she lacked family support and had depended entirely on Edward. 3 years earlier, when Edward was transferred to Chengdu Prefecture, she had cleverly learned to weave shoe brocade. With this livelihood skill, she could now leave Edward and support herself independently. I thought this was excellent. With so many years of life remaining, we could all live once more for ourselves.